Geopolitics and Empire is joined by fellow Spanish-speaking Croat Alex Krainer. He's the author of books like Mastering Uncertainty in Commodities Trading, Grand Deception, and Trend Following Bible. He's a hedge fund manager based in Monaco and founder of Krainer Analytics and iSystem Trend Following, a subscription service that helps people navigate trends profitably in multiple financial and commodity markets. It's good to have you back, Alex. How are things in Croatia, Monaco, or wherever you are?
I'm in Monaco right now. Thank you. Very good to join you. I have to, before we start, I have to give you my kudos because ever since I discovered your program, I spent many hours watching and listening because you uncover these incredible experts from domains that I wouldn't know about, and I don't know how you figure them out, how you source them, but I'm very grateful that you do because I get to learn very interesting things that otherwise I wouldn't have ever heard about. So to answer your question, I'm in Monaco now, but I did spend about 6 weeks in Croatia over the summer, which was wonderful. And now we're back in the fighting mode again in Monaco.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Now you're re-energized and ready to go. I would just comment on what you said. You know, I've kind of what I've done with the program has kind of been out of necessity. A lot of the podcasts and radio shows and stuff that I've listened to over the past few decades, I feel like they've stopped talking to all these like interesting experts, and I'm like, I want to hear from these people, so I might as well, reach out to them myself. So all right, before I get then to my first question, I wanted to just remind listeners to subscribe to the email list, the Telegram, the Twitter, and all other platforms like MeWe, Minds, Gab, Float, Odyssey, Brighteon, BitChute, because I'm being censored, and I'm doing this full time now. So your donations are not only appreciated but essential. And I also want to remind people to check out the first interview I did with Alex about a year ago, and I think it was October 2020. And that interview dealt with why he thinks the banking cartel is driving the crown virus agenda. I think it was a seminal interview that stands the test of time and is even more relevant today. So on to the first question now. Alex, you recently published a great article and accompanying video on your iSystem website discussing Afghanistan. And let me just quote from it here. Quote, "The loss of Afghanistan not only stops the gravy train out of that nation, it also jeopardizes the empire's hegemony over its coveted Eurasian world island and ultimately everywhere else. The empire has already been checkmated in Ukraine, it lost Syria, and their hold on Iraq has all but slipped away. Afghanistan may well prove to be its mortal wound. Through history, empires have almost invariably been sordid business. As Tacitus wrote, they plunder, they butcher, they ravish, and they call it by the lying name of empire. They make a desert and call it peace. So if today's empire has been mortally wounded, and I believe it has, then good riddance," end quote. I would tend to agree with you that Afghanistan signals the end of empire. Others are echoing this sentiment, from Russians like Alexander Dugin, who recently published a post saying the same, to a number of patriotic American writers publishing in The American Mind, Spiked, and elsewhere. But sometimes I wonder, the empire seems resilient. So is this really the death knell for the American empire? And what does, U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan mean going forward?
Well, I think that first of all, I would qualify the term American empire, because I think that today the fact that the American military force and economic might is supporting the empire has less to do with the American people and the United States Republic than it has with a certain nexus of power that's I think. If you get to the bottom of things, it's clustered around the financial capital, around the international banking cartel, and the corporations that have grown up around it. I think that in all cases through history, empires have been more a structure of power, a small network of powerful people and powerful organizations that simply co-opt and infiltrate the political might of, let's call it, national entities, and then use their military muscle and their economic muscle to get to their own, to pursue their own agendas. So the case of today's empire, it has begun. It was born as the British Empire, and then after World War I, it kind of transferred the military headquarters and the political headquarters to the United States. But I believe that the ideological and intellectual home turf is still London. And so what does it mean that they got kicked out of Afghanistan? Well, first of all, it's been a humiliating defeat, because, like if you go back 20 years ago, it was common to say that the United States is the greatest fighting force that there ever was. Nobody wanted to risk getting invaded by the United States. Nobody thought that they could resist the United States. And I think that this facade has completely crumbled now. If you cannot secure a country and protect it from a limited force of peasants with using very old style Second World War weapons, then how can you fight great rivals like China or Russia? How can you dream about invading and regime changing Iran? And so that is already a very big blow for the empire. But also the spectacle of the Afghan president fleeing with bags of cash. 2 days later, Afghan's central bank chief also fleeing the country. That's a signal that the empire cannot protect its servants, and the empire depends on its servant. Like in every country that they go, they create a network of corrupt officials that enable the empire to bring in its own corporations, to sell their own goods, to win contracts, and to basically get to indebt the country on behalf of Western banks for the benefit of Western corporations and so forth. But you need local officials that will make all that stick and give it a veneer of legality, with the laws that they pass. But then these officials need to be protected. They need to be safe. And, if they have to flee the country the day you announce that you're going to withdraw, then that's a very, very bad sign and a big warning to their puppets and servants everywhere else, which is, all of Middle East, Africa, South America, Central America, and so forth. Now they all realize that they can't rely on the protection of the empire. And so I think that ultimately they will have to make nice with their own people. They will not be able to just plow over the society and implement their fourth industrial revolution and build back better and force everybody to accept these insane measures. And so they'll have to compromise. They'll have to seek support from within their own countries, from the grassroots. And they will have to think about cooperating with other powers, primarily China and Russia.
And so you mentioned again that from the British Empire, then kind of moved the military might to Washington, and that's been spent now. Kind of, where does it go from here? Do you see it now going somewhere else? Some people talk about China as this new rising power, and what's going to happen from here on out, as we see, when empires decline, sometimes they just withdraw, kind of like instead of going out with a bang, they go out kind of like with a fart or something, or do you think, or on the other extreme, sometimes they have this hubris, they kind of go crazy, and there's miscalculations and wars start. So what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think that your question it anticipates one of the most interesting questions in this, one of the most interesting developments in this set of circumstances. And I have to say, this is something that I intend to research a little bit more thoroughly. But one thing that I've been observing is that, there's been a rift between China and the West. And when I say the West, I'm not speaking about the tiff with Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. I'm talking about the fact that barely 10 years ago, people like Zbigniew Brzezinski and George Soros and so forth, that whole group, they were speaking very affirmatively about China being the next global power, about China being the nation that's going to own the globalization, that's going to be the leading economic and military superpower of the world, and who is going to lead the world into this, next phase of history. And then when you look at the history of the relationship between China and the West, you see that after Nixon went to China and China opened up to the West, that they have actually propped up China very deliberately. And so the question that I had, and I think I know the answer to this question, but the question that I had is, China obviously drew them in. And China obviously played the role of like, we're going to be the next global cup. And up until 10 years ago or less, they really believed that they had their next host for the empire. And it's obviously that now they no longer do, because if you look at George Soros' statements about China 10 years ago and his statements now, it has flipped from white to black. So he used to be gung-ho about China, 2009, 2010. There's a statement of his in Financial Times saying that China is going to own the globalization process and it's going to be the leading superpower of the world, to today saying that no, we can't have China because the human rights, they don't respect human rights and so forth, of course. And so something went sour there. And I have the impression, which I cannot substantiate now because the process is not very clear to me, the political process within China is not so clear to me, but it seems to me that China drew them in. That China played the role of like, okay, we're going to be the next global cup. They were allowed, because it was very clear that China was allowed to devalue their currency to become the world's most competitive exporter, the exporting superpower, that this was allowed through the World Trade Organization, that even when, 10, 20 years ago, it was very clear that China was abusing their currency. They were, they did competitive valuation that shouldn't have been allowed, and that should have triggered retaliatory measures from the United States or Europe. That this was all allowed to happen. And there's this dilemma whether China actually intended to take on that role, or whether they simply misled this global elite. And so the reason why I believe that they misled the global elite is first the reactions of the global elites themselves, but then also when you pay close attention to Xi Jinping's speeches and statements, you see that they did not forget their century of humiliation. That this is very, very present to them. It's very central to the way they look at their role in the world. And it's very clear that they understand who has inflicted that century of humiliation on them. So it just doesn't seem probable that, knowing all that, they would voluntarily make themselves the servant of that same network of power, because it's also clear that that empire, that network of power, depletes the host. It's done so with the Great Britain. It's done so with the United States. And if China agreed and accepted being their military muscle and their global cup, then China itself would become exhausted and depleted. And that's obviously not obviously, but it seems clear to me that they're not choosing that path. So where does it go from here? I think that the empire has hit the brick wall, and I see that the British officials like Tony Blair, for example, they're fantasizing about organizing a new coalition of the willing, about mobilizing their European partners and NATO and sourcing military troops from Ukraine, from I don't know where else. But I think that these are, at this point, we're talking fantasies. We're talking denial. I think the game is up. I think that the next coming powers, China and Russia, have completely understood the game, and they are playing, a 10-dimensional chess against them, and all the tricks and perfidy that they used over the last 2-3 centuries are not working anymore. So I think that the game is up for the Western Empire, and I think that there are healthy forces in the United States that probably want to get the United States back on their Republican foundation, meaning to turn the nation again into a democratic people's republic, and that they do not want to be the empire's bludgeon anymore. So I think that for everybody else, so if you're not part of the 0.001%, if you're not if you do not have a vested interest in this empire, I think that's all good news.
Yeah, and what you kind of just brought out is one of the key questions I keep asking my guests, because I think it's one of the most important of this struggle between East and West now, China, Russia, and the British American Empire, and it's still not quite clear, as you said, whether the Chinese elites are on board with the Western elites, with this new world empire they're trying to build, the Great Reset, and this sort of thing. And I go back and forth because evidence comes out that makes you lean towards one side, and then more evidence comes out, the following week that makes you go back. And I was noticing Robin Monotti, the Italian architect who I interviewed last year, was posting on his Telegram just yesterday that how in China they have banned forcing vaccination mandates for universities and schools, which is the opposite of what's happening in the West. So it seems like there is this kind of disconnect and other things. I was my previous guest Artyom Lukin, who I just spoke to, on his Twitter, he was pointing out how Russia refuses to take any foreign funds to develop its infrastructure, even from the Chinese. It doesn't want to become indebted and controlled by foreign capital. And so you do see kind of this sovereignty building in Russia and China. It's really hard to say, but I think you're on point there. So moving on then from Afghanistan to the economy, you say that, quote, the fallout from Afghan events will have far-reaching consequences, end quote. Some have noted that 2 years after the Soviets left Kabul in 1989, the USSR collapsed. It seems money printing has gone ultra exponential now. As the debts, it was just reported Social Security in the US will run out in 12 years, 1 year earlier than expected. Inflation is going crazy. Will the US collapse like the USSR, and what global economic consequences does US withdrawal have from Afghanistan, have not just for the US, but globally?
A very good question. I think that certain structures in the US and the West in general, and I also don't want to be unfair to the French, because as this empire has political leverage in the UK and the United States, it also has very strong political leverage in France. So France is also part of this. That's just an aside. So one thing that I try to convey to people when we're talking about the economy is that it's very important to differentiate the economy from the financial superstructure that's built on top of it. So when I talk about the economy, I mean that we all do what we do in life. Some of us are do podcasts, other people cut hair, bake bread, farmers, car mechanics, architects, dentists, and so on. All of these people, regardless of what happened, you can do your podcast, the baker can bake bread, the farmer can farm still, the land still grows food. So all of those things can continue to operate without any interruption. The thing that the thing where the interruptions happen, where the discontinuity happens, is that at some point the money becomes worthless. So you have, okay, so one thing that's likely to happen here, is that we're gonna see interest rates rise considerably at some point in the future. We're gonna see the equity and bonds bubble burst. There's going to be strong upward pressure on commodity prices. And all of that together is probably going to lead the American financial system towards high rates of inflation. And so what you have then is the loss of purchasing power of the dollar. And depending on how, your previous guest, I heard him and he said, like, the country that has the nation that has the world's reserve currency cannot have hyperinflation. That's impossible. Well, first of all, I'm not sure that that's right. Second of all, the reserve currency status of the United States has already been shrinking for many years now, and it could shrink rapidly in the coming future. And we already see that, some 44% of what the American government is spending is being printed out of thin air by the Federal Reserve. So it's not being taxed out of a vibrant economy. It's being printed out of thin air. All this money printing cannot not corrode the purchasing power of the dollar. Another wild card there is that by virtue of having a reserve currency, you have an estimated $30 trillion of US denominated assets abroad. So when, at some point you might have a stampede of foreign creditors wanting to get rid of their dollars, And so there are many, many risks on the horizon, and there are very many good things going that could keep this system going for a very long time. So we are going to see disruptions, but these disruptions are in the financial realm. And then the payments are going to grind to a halt. But unblocking that is the question of the circulation of the currency. So if you have alternative currencies, whether it's going to be Bitcoin, whether people are going to put their thinking caps on and invent regional currencies and local currencies, whether the government is going to have an alternative currency ready, whether states are going to all start issuing that, we don't know. That's going to come from the initiative of the people. But we know that, for example, in the 1920s in Germany, when you had the Weimar hyperinflation, that these alternative local currencies just started popping up like mushrooms in German villages. Farmers still produce food, and people who could access villages and farms, they were okay. People in the cities were in real trouble. But I think that people in the United States are seeing this coming. There's a growing movement of urban gardens, urban agriculture. People are getting together. They're organizing, and I think that all of these little networks of people thinking forward, kind of understanding that a big storm is coming their way, they're going to be a bit more prepared, and so maybe they're going to be able to weather the blow, weather this crisis a bit better than what you might think in the darkest, in the darkest projections.
And you mentioned Bitcoin, and I thought I just mentioned, I believe you started not too long ago, perhaps a few months ago, your YouTube channel, and now you're giving regular updates. In fact, today you just published like a 10-13 minute update. And a few months ago, what caught my attention, you started talking about Bitcoin, and you accurately predicted the $50,000 top in Bitcoin before it dropped to around 30,000, and then you accurately predicted its bounce back up to 50,000 again, where it recently returns to. I'm still of the opinion that I don't trust crypto or Bitcoin, and I view it as an elite project, whose purpose is to bridge us into the central bank digital currency system. But nevertheless, it seems like it's here to stay, and it will become part of something like Internet 2.0. How do you view crypto or Bitcoin in general, and how do you see cryptos and CBDCs kind of going forward? Just briefly.
Well, okay, CBDCs already I view very negatively, because the CBDCs are going to be an attempt, probably a failed attempt by the central banks to keep us in their matrix and to give us no alternative but to use the currencies that they issue. And this is exactly the industrial scale wealth transfer mechanism that they've been using for the last 300 years to extract wealth from the populations they created to a very, very narrow circle of stakeholders. With regards to crypto, like my thing is analyzing price charts. So I don't really have a very strong view about Bitcoin and all these things. But like the problem that we have is that with this insane off the charts, unprecedented quantitative easings that all the major central banks in the world have been doing, there's such a quantity of liquid assets, of money in the world that, like as soon as there's like some little crisis or some little opportunity perceived in some market, they very quickly trend up and go vertical. And we've seen that in so many markets, including Bitcoin a few months ago, right? And so what do you have? You have about an estimated $200 trillion in the shadow banking system. And shadow banking system is basically what you have in hedge funds, private equity, pension funds, endowments, and so forth. So these are like financial institutions that are not non-bank financial institutions. So they're not regulated as lenders, but they nevertheless have this enormous amount of liquid investable assets under their control. So when you have these, Bitcoin is now, its market cap is less than $1 trillion. It's like about $900 billion, right? The gold and silver, if you want to exaggerate and estimate them, maybe they come up to $10 trillion. On the other hand, you have these $200 trillion in the shadow banking system that's panicky, that can easily stampede into Bitcoin, into gold, into silver, and so forth. And so over the last few years, we've seen many assets that form this little trend, and then all of a sudden it accelerates and it goes vertical like a hockey stick. And so this has been happening disconcertingly often in the last maybe 5 years. And Bitcoin did this last year, and you had lumber prices do this last year. And so I think this could, Bitcoin could have that kind of appreciation still, because simply the quantity of assets, quantity of money chasing these alternative assets is just enormous, and they react, they go like a herd in a big stampede. Like today they're buying Bitcoin at $20,000. 1 week later they're buying it at $50,000. It doesn't matter, just buy Bitcoin. And so saying that there's nothing behind Bitcoin, which is true, it's a limited supply of nothing. Saying that gold and silver are boring and nobody cares anymore, it's a barbarous relic and so forth. We don't know. We don't know where the next stampede is going to be. It could be Bitcoin again. It could be other cryptocurrencies. It could be gold and silver, because gold and silver have not done anything. They've been relatively depressed compared to the prices of other commodities, and commodities themselves have been depressed relative to other traditional asset classes. And so anything's possible. With regards to Bitcoin, I simply look at the charts, and then when there's an interesting situation, I like to point it out, not because I'm a big Bitcoin enthusiast, but because, let's say that my thing is to try to popularize the idea that you can you can navigate markets better as an investor, as a trader, by reading the charts rather than trying to figure out the economic fundamentals of this or that asset.
Yeah, and you kind of answered my next question on gold and silver today. You published an article and video saying that it's looking, it's making sense that the next gold and silver rally could be explosive, and in general commodities. And as you mentioned, my previous guest Nicholas Glinsman, you disagreed with him on hyperinflation, and I think I would have as well. I agree with you that it's possible hyperinflation, but I think you agree with him on commodities. He says commodities is the macro trade. I think others are echoing this sentiment. And as you said, we're seeing inflation, supply chain breakdowns, droughts, and makes total logical sense, as well as the all-time highs in the markets. And just I don't know if you have any other thoughts on gold, silver, commodities.
No, I think that the whole commodity complex will at some point probably move higher. Some analysts, and I don't disagree with that, I actually agree with them, they anticipate a commodity super cycle, because commodities have been very depressed and they have actually reached all-time lows relative to the valuation of stocks and bonds. And so there will be very momentous price readjustments in the economy. And probably over the next 10 to 25 years, we're going to see commodity prices move much, much higher. Which ones are going to go up? We don't know. We know that, for example, energy prices are certain to go up a lot higher. The British Ministry of Defense has published, that was in 2012 already, they've published a report in which they expect that oil prices are going to go up to $500 per barrel, because it is clear that we're losing oil production. All the conventional, we're losing between 4 and 9% of oil production from conventional sources, depending on who you ask. But the 4% a year, that's very optimistic. I think it's closer to like 6 or 7%. And so not only that, but there's something called energy return on energy invested. And that's something that's not commonly understood or talked about. But basically, 100 years ago or so, when people just put a hole in the ground and oil came squirting out, you would get, for an energy investment of 1 barrel equivalent, you would get 100 barrels of oil out of the ground, because it just came gushing out all by itself. And then this gradually declined, and by 1990s we were at about 40 to 1. So for 1 barrel equivalent of energy invested, you would get about 40 barrels out of the ground. We are now on average below 15 for global production. I think it's around 11 for the United States. And all of these alternative sources like fracking, like tar sands and so on, they're in the low single digits. They're 5 or 6. So energy is becoming increasingly expensive to the society in real terms. So producing energy has become much, much more expensive in real terms, in terms of real energy that has to be expanded to extract energy. So the fact that it's still cheap in monetary terms is an imbalance. It's an anomaly, and it will reprice eventually. So will British Ministry of Defense's projection that we're going to see $500 per barrel, they project this for 2040, But 2040 is less than 20 years from now. So that's that's not that far away. It's not even a full generation. So yeah, we're going to see all that. We're going to see all those crises. But I want to finish this subject on an optimistic note, because if you let the markets work out these imbalances, if you allow the markets to react and adapt to these the human society will adapt. If you have to pay $5 or $10 per gallon to fill up your car, people will buy smaller cars. More people will share rides. More people will use public transport. Governments, countries are going to invest in better, more efficient public transport network, like you have in Japan, like you have in Switzerland, and so forth. And these things function phenomenally. And before oil, it wasn't that long ago, we already had industrial revolution. Human societies were advancing. We had innovation, we had engineering, and so forth. There's no reason why today, with computer-aided design, with all these advanced industrial achievements that we had, we couldn't absorb that blow and continue as a civilized society without everything falling apart and without us living in caves again. So that sometimes, like people when they look at, like the Club of Rome, when they do their charts about how it's all going to go to hell, I think it's not necessary to be afraid of that. I think you just need to allow the markets and the human societies to adapt to these changes, and they will. Rather than top down, you have all these ideologues of fourth industrial revolution who are going to tell us how we're going to organize society, and they barely make any sense at all. In all intelligent systems in nature, always, everywhere, intelligent agency comes bottom up. Sorry, not top down. Always, like the innovation comes from the smallest parts of any structure. So I think the same should be valid for human societies.
Yeah, kind of just to add what you said, I'm totally against this whole, Klaus Schwab, Davos, Great Reset, Club of Rome. Everyone knows this new dystopian system they want to implement. But I lived in a yurt in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia for a little over a year. I absolutely loved it. I love living in nature in the middle of nowhere. Fortunately, it's my family says no. I would go back and live there, but my family says no. It's too cold. And just to add, I think what you were talking about energy. You agreed with one of my previous guests. I think it was Steve St. Angelo, the New Year's Eve episode, December 31st, 2020. People can go check that out. He talks more in depth about what you were saying. I guess the final topic I wanted to broach was, getting a follow-up from you on, let's call it the crown virus 1984. Everything, we talked about in October of 2020 has, I think, only been confirmed and come true in spades. You very soberly made the profound analysis that, this is it. This is the battle, the culmination, Huxley's final revolution, as he talked about, Skynet has become self-aware. This is our battle against Sauron and Mordor. What fears do you have on where we are headed, considering the social credit vaccine passport systems that are being activated? And how do you see things playing out with this whole Great Reset,
Well, I have to say that I've been as things unfold, I'm becoming more and more optimistic about the future of humanity, and I'll explain why. I had this impression from the very beginning that what they set out to do is overly ambitious, and what you get is the archetypal story of Icarus. I don't know how you say it exactly in English. They're flying too close to the sun. They're trying to do too many things. They're trying. The project is overly ambitious, and I think that the wheels are coming off. And people are waking up. You have an awakening that's drastically different from what it was 1 year ago. I think that the systems and the infrastructure that they would have to have in place and that would have to be operational is not there. They have not prepared the digital currencies they should have. They have not prepared the chip technologies they should have. One of the things that they ideally should have done is to immediately withdraw cash. Because when the fear is red hot, then you can go forth and tell people, oh my God, like you can get contaminated by touching cash that other people have touched. So we have to do away with that. From now on, it's all electronic money, and we're going to introduce central bank digital currencies. They don't have that, so cash is still in circulation. The vaccine, these things that they're administering are obviously not nearly as good as they hoped that they would be, and people are waking up to that. People are not enthusiastic about their children getting injected, so you have a very, very strong pushback now. And I sense also a very, very strong loss of enthusiasm on the side of people who would have to enforce all this. And then I'll say another thing, which I'm going to be impolite here, but I've been paying attention to the speeches and interviews and statements by various people, like Klaus Schwab, like Yuval Noah Harari, their ideologue in chief, I guess. And I have to say that I find them staggeringly dumb. They're not smart, and I don't know how they can be as dumb as they are. But I tried to explain it to myself. Well, at first, I was so shocked by some of the statements from Klaus Schwab that I thought that how could you get like he was talking about how we're going to have these machines at the airports. They're going to read your mind. They're going to read your thoughts to clear you for travel, because if you have evil thoughts, that this machine is going to say like, no, you cannot travel. And he said this not exactly in these words. I can't quote him exactly, but he was saying exactly this, and I thought like he can't be that dumb. He just cannot be that dumb. But then I thought they don't need to really have this technology. They just have to make us believe that they have this technology, and people have to believe that all these information tools and weapons exist, and that they're real, and that they really function. I'm convinced that one of these things was supposed to be the Theranos, the Elizabeth Holmes, because they were going to have this phenomenal technology hidden behind the veils of intellectual property that would diagnose you with this or that disease, and which people couldn't challenge because it would be hidden behind, trade secret, patents, whatever. And it would be everywhere. In every pharmacy, you would just get like a little drop of blood, and then they would tell you, you have this, now you have to get that vaccine. And then the fact that Theranos just kind of unraveled and fell apart, I think that was a big blow to their agenda. They didn't have the time and the resources to replace it with a Theranos 2.0, so they had to fall back on PCR tests. Well, too many people know that PCR tests are no good. Too many people know. So you have many professionals in the healthcare industry that understand that what they're doing is not right, and so their conviction in all this is gone. But then I think they also, we have all these technologies that exist, that are available, that exist maybe in the conceptual and prototype and testing phases, but are far and far away from being possible to implement them on an industrial scale. And so they imagine that they have all these levers of control that they can use to get complete control over the societies, and they have all this money. So they go to their experts in these universities, and all these experts are begging for money. They're gaping for money, and so the experts convince them that they can create all these amazing things. And the people who are funding the experts are eager to believe all these fantasies. And so they throw a lot of money at these experts. These experts are creating these things. And I think it's like a little groupthink echo chamber where they just convince themselves of things that they can do, but in reality, we're very far from being able to develop such technologies in a way that's robust and reliable and that can be implemented on a mass industrial scale. So I think that they've convinced themselves of something that is ultimately a fantasy that's not achievable. But I think that they are now at a position where they just have to go all the way. They cannot retreat. They cannot say like, well, sorry, this is not going to work. Let's just go back to being nice with each other. You know, like as Peter, not Peter, Kenneth Galbraith said that the people who find themselves in the position of power and privilege in a society will risk their total destruction before they will give up any part of their privilege. And we are at the juncture, except that, you know, like they're playing a weaker and weaker hand, whereas the pushback is gathering pace and it's turning into a tsunami that's going to overwhelm them. And then before I wrap this up, I'm gonna point out another great fragility of what they've done. To do what they do, to execute and with control, they have had to consolidate many of the key power structures in society, like media, like the banking and corporate world, right? So, you know, like we had 60 media corporations 20 years ago. Now we have 5 or 6. We had tens of thousands of banks in the United States. Now, top 5 or 6 have 80% of customer deposits. So what that does is that, you know, like it's easier for them to control 5 people, but it's also easier for us to behead a 5-headed hydra versus a 1,000-headed hydra. So, you know, like everything they're doing is fragile, and the farther it goes, the more fragile it goes at an accelerating pace. So to wrap it all up, I'm increasingly optimistic, but we have to keep our thinking hats on and really think through where we want to take this society, because we get the privilege of, I think, shaping the future that our coming generations are going to live with. So that's a wonderful privilege, but it's also a risky ride. It's going to be a bumpy ride, but you know, like, God, have we been born in interesting times?
Yeah, I think we need to be optimistic. I know in the end, good wins in this lifetime and the next. But as you said, each generation fights this evil in a different form, and you know, whether we die trying or not, you know, in the end, good wins, and we just have to have a good attitude going about it. You know, if I end up getting sent to a quarantine camp, I'll be laughing on the way. You know, it's like, what else can you do? And so we just fight the good fight. And you said keep your head up, work together, network, and be joyful. Is there any final thought then you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I think that we need to be courageous, you know, like, and that's not just to say, let's throw caution to the wind, but, you know, like, to think in perspective, you know, like we had world wars, you know, and those are terrible things. But, you know, like, if you look at how many people died in the World War, it was a lot of people. But, you know, like, it was something like in World War II, 1.3% of all the French people died, and I think like 0.8% of all the British people. Russians had higher casualty rates and so on, but we're still talking about a relatively small percentage of people. So, you know, like, the being fearful because something bad might happen to me is, I think, not necessary. I think that bad things can happen, but the odds of something bad happening to you are not very high, regardless. And you can also be smart about it, you know, like, you don't have to like rush and bang your head against the wall, you know, like, you can do small, subtle, smart things. We can grind this thing down with million acts of resistance, with millions, hundreds of millions of acts of refusal to cooperate, to comply, and so forth. And we're going to win this fight. There's no doubt about that.
All right. You're on Twitter at Naked Hedgie. Your websites are thenakedhedgie.com and isystem-tf.com, as well as you're on YouTube. I'll include all the links in the description. Is there any other website or project we should know about, or perhaps you can tell us more about iSystem?
Well, iSystem, it's it's for professional users. iSystem, I basically use it. I have to correct you because you introduced me as a hedge fund manager. I have to correct that I'm a former hedge fund manager, because today I'm more in the publishing business, and what I publish is a daily trend compass reports that generates trend following buy and sell signals on about 200 financial and commodities markets. And you can't manage money and do that at the same time, because then there's a conflict of interest. You might front run your trades. So that has been a big change in my life over the last 2 years.
All right. Okay. Alex Krainer, he's frequently right on the money. I would say follow him on Twitter, on his new and growing YouTube channel. Check out iSystem if that's your sort of thing. And again, thanks for being back on Geopolitics and Empire.
It's been a privilege, Roy. All the best. Thank you for what you're doing. I really appreciate it. I watch practically every podcast you put out. And so upwards and forwards to the better future.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast interview. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list through which you can receive an update of every new podcast, as well as a long list of key news headlines once a week. We're being heavily censored. YouTube has deleted some of our videos, and we currently have one strike. Patreon has terminated our account. Facebook has restricted our page, and Reddit has been deleting posts. Our favorite social media channels are Telegram and Twitter. The best places to watch the podcast beyond YouTube are on Odyssey, BitChute, and Brighteon. The best places to listen to the podcast are on SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, Google, or on any other podcast app. To help keep this podcast alive, leave a review on Apple Podcasts and wherever else. Subscribe to all our platforms and leave a donation if possible via Subscribestar, PayPal, Bitcoin, or Ethereum. You can also find us on MeWe, Minds, Gab, Float, VK, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Thanks for listening.